Welcome to Method and Madness.
This is an ongoing conversation about great books hosted by writers Aaron Gwynn and Brad Kelly.
In each series, we figure out what makes a book like Moby Dick or Blood Meridian worth reading,
And how writers might learn from it in order to master their craft.
We'll also explore the labyrinth that lies beneath the novel
And find out what it means to our most insightful friends. When he woke, it was 1:06 by the digital clock on the bedside table. He lay there looking at the ceiling, the raw glare of the vapor lamp outside bathing the bedroom in a cold and bluish light, like a winter moon, or some other kind of moon. Something stellar and alien in its light that he'd come to feel comfortable with. Anything but sleep in the dark. It's one of my favorite passages in the book. Right before Moss decides that he's got to bring water to that dying narco.
Yeah, and that's a very that decision is very fateful, I would say, right?
Right.
I mean, and it's interesting you mentioned this. This is actually related to a question that I kind of wanted to ask you, this very aspect of it, this him going to take water out to the dying man he saw out at the out in that goat fuck in the desert. Um,
Mhm.
as I think about it structurally, there's an aspect in which you can look at that and say, well, that's how, Moss almost got away with it, but he gets wrapped back up in it because he goes back out there, right?
Hmm.
But the fact is they can find him with the transponder anyway.
That's correct.
So what's going on structurally there? Like why I I'm not saying it's a plot hole, but I think there's
Mhm.
a way that a person could look at that and see that as a plot hole, right?
Well,
Like,
so I see it as completely, I see it as the core of who Moss is. He's a guy who can shoot the enemy in Vietnam with a scoped rifle, but he's a guy who can walk away with the money, but he's not a guy who can just wake up in the middle of the night and think about the dying narco, a man who with his final breaths was just begging for water. He can't do that.
mhm,
That's who he is. Also, Cormac needs Moss and Carla Jean to go on the run,
yes.
right?
Yeah,
But
as a
they've already made, or Moss rather, has already made the mistake. I mean, he's taken the money with the transponder in it. They're going to find him
hmm hmm
sooner or
That's
later.
true. Yes, that's absolutely true. And so narratively, it's on one hand, it's just more interesting because it does send him on the run, right? He now he realizes he's being chased before he would have otherwise if it had just been the transponder thing.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, it gets him to run before Shagur comes for him.
yeah.
Um, I also think it's what he would do. I think he would take the
Sure.
money, and then I think he would go back. I think
Yeah,
that's who he
yeah.
is. I think it's fundamental to who he is as a character.
Right. No, I definitely agree with that. I think there's a, a way of looking at it too, where, if we're going to get into sort of English majory territory on this, which we will, I think there's an interesting thing here too, where, okay, so if they had, if the chase, the pursuit of Moss had simply relied on the transponder, obviously it would be a very different book. Um, but in Moss going back, there's this way in which so he goes back, he realizes the chase is on sooner than he would have if it had just been he'd just been pursued through the transponder. And
Mm-hmm.
this, I think it almost him going back to give that water almost saves him in a way because
Mm,
it gives him that whatever 12-hour head start on this chase, right? He was
right,
sort of doomed as soon as he picked the money up, he was doomed, but
right.
his humanity actually does give him a head start. Um, and I think, obviously we don't want to overinterpret the intentions of McCarthy, but I think there's a way of looking at that where he's not saying that, you'll be saved, but maybe if you retain your humanity, you might have a shot.
Right. He's got a chance. I mean,
Yeah,
there's a chance he makes it through.
right, right.
Um, and he's very capable.
Of course, yeah, yeah.
He's not capable enough.
Yeah, I thought this was one thing that was interesting about and this is a book that I more than other books that have been adapted into films, I struggle sometimes to disentangle the film and the book from
Hmm.
each other. I think it's because I've seen the film probably 10 times.
Hmm.
And
Me too.
yeah, and I mean it's an all-timer film. And it's an all-timer novel as well. But one thing I was interested in, apparently in the casting of Josh Brolin as Llewellyn Moss, the
Right.
Coen brothers decided that they needed a person who was interesting to watch do th normal things without
Hmm.
talking. And that's sort of
Yes.
why they ended up going with Josh Brolin. They found him interesting to look at when he was just going about doing things. And a lot of the film is a lot of the film and the book, it's a lot of Moss and Chigurh doing things without saying anything, right? Because they're living this sort
Right.
of solitary existence. Yeah.
Well, the Coen brothers said, I saw an interview they did with Charlie Rose,
Hmm.
is they saw Tommy Lee Jones as the sheriff immediately, and they felt like that casting decision, was taken care of. Um, but they really fretted over Shagur. They're like,
Yeah.
who are we going to get to do this? And,
Yeah.
it can't be someone who is already tied in the public imagination with another performance. It, has
Mhm.
to be a little bit of an unknown in America,
Yeah.
at least,
Yeah.
right? Um, and someone who can obviously pull all this off. But they told themselves that, oh, Llewellyn Moss, that'll be easy. He'll be easy to
Right.
cast.
Right.
And then they began to, you know, meet with people and look at, go through auditions and all this stuff. And Joel or Ethan, I can't remember which one said, we looked at each other and we said, all we need is a clean cut American boy. Why can't we find one?
Right.
And I have ideas about why they couldn't find one in 2006, but you know,
Yeah.
well, I mean, I'll
There
just,
weren't any.
well, all those roles, like the young alpha male role, all those roles started going to Brits, uh, Irishmen,
Yeah.
Aussies, um, Scots. Like they were getting all the alpha male roles because they couldn't find many young American men that could project or portray, that kind of masculinity.
Right. Well, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if that is the case, if that's easier or harder now, almost 20 years later.
Well, oh gosh, there's an interview that Michael Douglas did maybe 5 or so years ago where he basically said the same thing. I mean, he said, like all these roles are going to Brits and Scots and
Mhm.
Aussies and the Irish, because there's a crisis of masculinity
Mm.
among young American actors.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if that'll get better, if that'll get worse, if that'll get. I mean, Tom Hardy can't play everyone. He's
Right.
only one man. He's only one
Right.
Man.
Right.
I
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's some other, like, I start thinking now you cast this movie, and I don't want to spend all the time thinking about the movie because it's more about the book, but you think about like if they were casting it now, the first person that came to mind was Glenn Powell. I don't know if you know who that is. But
Mm-mm,
then
mm-mm.
my follow-up sort of thought is like, no, he's too handsome. Like Josh
Right,
Brolin, and this is no knock on him.
right.
He's not. I don't think. I'm sure he's attractive in his own right, but he's not
Right.
like a handsome guy. You don't put the picture of Josh Brolin next to the word handsome in the dictionary.
Yeah. I mean, he is a little scruffy, right?
Right, right.
You need a
Yeah, he's
kind of
kind of
guy
rough
who,
around the edges.
yeah, you need a like a blue collar. I mean, he's a welder. You need a blue
Right.
collar looking dude,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
um, which is hard to find.
Right, right. So he ends
I mean,
up
you could
he ends
cast an actual blue collar dude, I suppose, but
yeah,
you need
yeah,
somebody who can act.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, I got some other questions for you too. And we probably talked around some of this in the our great conversation with Ben Avery. I
Hmm.
really enjoyed talking with him. Because I have been thinking sort of separate from this before we even decided we were gonna talk about No Country for Old Men, and I knew we would talk about No Country for Old Men at some point. I have been thinking for a long time about this sort of the subgenre of guy with a gun on the cover, right?
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and this is, it's easier to maybe talk about this genre in film than it is in books. But it ranges everything from like random direct to video stuff from the 90s to films that I think are actually quite good, like Denzel Washington and Man on Fire, right? But
Hmm.
this sort of like, yeah, guy with a gun on the cover, right? And I think
Hmm.
we all kind of know what those are. Why isn't No Country for Old Men just another guy with a gun on the cover story?
Because the hero dies three-quarters of the way through it off scene,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And then
Yeah.
that shifts everything to Ed Tom Bell, and you realize, oh, this is this man's story. Like
Mm,
he's the one who will change. Moss doesn't
right.
change,
Not really. No. No. Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
He
he's the
he
same guy
makes
at the beginning and the end. In the
yep.
end, he's in a new situation, but he's not a different
He's in a new
person.
situation, same guy. He grows a
Yeah.
little more contemplative,
Hmm.
but he's not an especially reflective person.
Hmm.
And you can't be especially reflective if you're going to manage what he manages for as long as he manages it.
Hmm.
It's like being a baseball player, right? I've heard all these interviews with baseball players, and I've heard people call them dumb. And I'm like, they're not dumb. The reflectiveness has been trained out of them because it is death
Yeah.
if you're trying to react in the moment to whatever. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
absolute death.
Yeah, and if you put that, it's interesting the discourse around sort of intelligence, who's smart and who's dumb, because um, a lot of times it's people who are smart in one arena looking at what another person's doing that doesn't have anything to do with the kind of cognitive activities that they're doing. And like, oh, that
Hmm.
person's dumb. It's like, yeah, no, no. Like, you think about this, but athletes are a great example of this. It's like, you can take a great athlete, like a Hall of Famer pro
Hmm.
athlete in any sport.
Right.
They might not be able to do a single math. They might not be able to add two numbers in their head, but
Right.
they are not dumb. You don't get to do
No,
that
no,
if
they're
you're dumb.
absolutely not. No, they
Yeah.
have remarkable, like preternatural physical intelligence,
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
and it
And
goes away.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It can for sure. For sure.
Um,
What? Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead, go ahead. So with
Oh,
this,
yeah.
yeah, this broader
I,
question about,
yeah. What makes so I think that's a good answer. I mean, the guy with the gun genre is basically that guy with the gun has to survive to the end in a way. Or
right?
close or very close to the end. They have to at least have accomplished what they set out to do or
That's right.
solved the problem that they've been dealt
And then
in the
they're
beginning of the
exiled
book.
from the community, and they have to wander at the very end.
Right. Right, right. And this sort of doesn't do that. I mean, as I was reading it this time, I don't think it registered for me how unconventional the structure of this book is the first time I read
Mhm.
it, and how the strange decisions that Cormac McCarthy makes that take it away from sort of the guy with the gun on the cover traditional structure. And obviously, this thing we are talking about, Moss dying three-quarters of the way through, is part of that. Um, and it makes me wonder, sort of structurally. Maybe this is sort of the same question. Why does this book work structurally? Because I think it's very strange structurally, and I think in lesser hands it wouldn't work. Why does it? Maybe that's too big of a
Mhm.
question, but why does it
Guy
work?
trying to get away. Well, there's a guy trying to get away. We find it credible that he finds the MacGuffin he finds. We find it credible how he runs. We
Hmm.
have two people on either side of him, two characters on either side of him. One who is represents goodness, which is Sheriff Bell, and is compassion and empathy and a moral center. The other who is completely amoral, and McCarthy called Chigurh, quote, pretty much pure evil, end quote.
Right.
It's the pretty much that interests me in that particular sentence. So you have guys on either side, both chasing Moss, chasing after him for very different reasons. And the way in which Moss is able to cat and mouse the situation with Chigurh is very engaging. And
Hmm.
then when he dies off scene, and you have all these philosophical questions which force the reader to think back through what we've read. And also we have a really interesting villain, one of McCarthy's um philosopher psychopaths. He
Right.
loves that
Right.
character. I mean, that character is
Yes.
in Outer Dark. That character obviously is in Blood Meridian. That character is in Cities of the Plain. That character, with the Eduardo, the pimp character.
Right.
That character obviously is in No Country. That character is somewhat missing from the road. You don't really have that
Yeah.
nihilistic philosopher. Yeah, but McCarthy's very partial to that.
Right, right. Yeah, you as a writer, I think if you had created, say, Judge Holden, I can see the temptation to just put Judge Holden in every book you do. As being, I could see that
Right.
temptation being pretty strong, and not even necessarily conscious. You just, I'd be very curious to read the full 600 pages that Cormac wrote on this, and you do kind of wonder if there aren't moments where Chigurh gets a little bit more Judge Holden-y.
Yeah, he's
It's
got to
because
be
it's such an
smaller.
intoxicating character, It's
Well,
like, yeah,
he's grim.
hmm,
Like, he doesn't, Wells says he doesn't have a sense of humor. He's
right,
so grim and also depressed.
hmm,
And at the beginning of the book, reckless.
hmm,
Um, and Judge Holden is ebullient. He
hmm,
is so social,
yes,
and psychopathic, but he exists in society. He exists in groups. He searches people out,
hmm,
to be kind of part of their world and then to destroy it or whatever.
hmm. Yeah, yeah. And so this is yeah, so there's a way, I suppose there is a way to think about this is you can think of some kind of villain DNA that Cormac really brought to full flower in Judge Holden, and this is a different aspect of that, or a more grounded aspect of it in a way, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
Holden veers into the supernatural territory,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
whereas Chigurh, as far as we know, doesn't. Um,
That's right.
yeah, yeah, that's
It's
very
weird though,
interesting.
right? Like when I love the Coens adaptation. I think it's great. Watched it a bunch. It's right now it's playing on mute on my television screen in the background. It's very, very rewatchable. A lot of
Yes.
fun, complete blast.
Mhm.
I think Javier Bardem does as much with that character as can possibly be done. He's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
But when you embody that character, when you see that character walk around on the movie screen, and any actor, any director, however they portray it, you lose something of the almost blank ghost like quality of Shigur in the book. I mean, there,
Mm.
it was very hard for me to, when I first saw No Country and then I saw Anton Chigurh, appear at the very beginning of the film. I thought, oh, that's great. But also, I don't know, he's such a ghostly presence in the novel. I don't
Right.
mean that, literally. I mean metaphorically.
Sure.
And Sheriff Bell even says that. I
Right.
think he's pretty much like a ghost. I mean,
Right.
you have the whole haunting thing, and you lose that as soon as you embody the
Right.
character.
As soon as you put him in any well, I've thought about this too. So I saw the film before I read the book in this
Mm,
case. I saw it, in theaters. I had read, I think, All the Pretty Horses at this point. So I wasn't super deep on Cormac McCarthy at that point.
mhm,
And I thought it was great, but and then I went and read the book and I thought to myself, man, you could show me 10 different actors in different outfits and say pick which one of these should be Anton Chigurh, and I don't know that I'd have any reason to pick Javier Bardem in
mhm,
other than he looks like he could be scary.
mhm, mhm.
But beyond that, for me there wasn't a ton of correspondence visually between the character in the book and the character in the film. I felt like they made some interesting choices and they kind of took a chance
Mhm.
because it's a the haircut and the clothes are a deliberate choice.
Of course.
um it wasn't just like let's make a guy who looks like he lives in 1980 and is kind of scary. It was a
Right.
lot. There was a lot more aspects to that decision. And so
Well,
you
they
can
just
imagine this movie being very good with a very different Chigurh character, I think.
yes. I
Yeah.
saw him when I first read. Oh, let me tell briefly because I think it might
Yeah.
it might be interesting, my kind of experience. So like by the time summer of 2005 this book came out, I was huge into Cormac. I'd taught Blood Meridian a bunch, and um my first book was a collection of short stories, was a finalist for this um big award. I didn't win. Big award in New York City, and I was at this schwanky kind of thing, the Young Lions Award, blah blah blah. Anyway, another finalist, Mark Bojanowski, he's a big Cormac guy too, and we were talking like at the ceremony. He goes, "Oh, yeah, have you got a hold of Cormac's new book?" I said, "What?
Hmm.
He's got a new book?" He's like, "Yeah, it comes out this summer." I'm like, "Oh, like you got to see some of it?" He goes, "I read it." He goes, I got a ARC from a bookstore I used to work from. And he's like, some people are saying like it's not as good, but I think he's at the top of his game. And so
Mm,
he was really excited. So I still, at the time I was reviewing for a review of contemporary fiction.
mm.
And as soon as I got back to Charlotte, I emailed the managing editor, and I was like, I want to review the McCarthy. Send it to me right now. So I got an ARC, an advanced review copy, like a week later. So I read
Nice.
it, I don't know, 2, 3 months before it came out.
Nice.
And man, it's one of the only books. There are a lot of books I've loved and lived with, and it's one of the only books I consumed in the way I consumed it. Like I would read until my eyes crossed, and then go eat and shower or do something else, and then go right back. Like I was in that book, and it really had a huge emotional effect on me, and did so as I was reading. I mean, there were moments in the book I can remember standing in the shower after I just read a passage and kind of arguing with McCarthy in my head. Right? I'm like, oh, if you're
Yeah.
just going to do a nihilistic thing, why don't you blah blah blah? And I got to a passage that sort of rectified that for me, and I realized, okay, that's not. I don't find the book to be nihilistic at all.
No.
Um, I find it to be quite hopeful, especially Ed Tom Bell's dream at the very end of the book.
Mm, mm.
And the whole Gnostic thing is hugely. part of No Country as well.
Mhm.
So man, I consumed this thing and then immediately reread it. My best buddy lived out here at the time. I loaned him my ARC and he read it, and like we were really knocked out by that book. And so when it came out, it was really satisfying to see it become a bestseller. And then,
Mhm.
Coen Brothers adaptation wasn't far behind that.
Yeah. Well, and then The
So,
Road
I
was
mean,
the next year, right?
that was insane too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was fall of 2006. I
Mhm.
so when you talk about, man with a gun kind of book, why is this so satisfying? I can remember, as I devoured it, that first read being so into every little physical detail about how Moss, hides the briefcase, about how Moss, goes and gets a shotgun, saws off the barrels, dresses it with a
Mhm.
file, like, all that kind of stuff. And also the book is very funny at times.
Yeah.
People like, and I think with McCarthy generally, they they don't talk enough about how funny he is. Like there's a lot of funny stuff in this book.
Oh, yeah. Most of it out of the mouth of Ed Tom Bell, I would say.
Most of it out of the mouth of Ed Tom Bell. But I mean, it's not in the movie where Moss comes back in after getting the money, and Carla Jean says, "Did you get me any cigarettes?" And Moss's response is, "Cigarettes? How are we fixed for cyanide?"
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
It just,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's just on and on and on. And also, I really loved Moss's stream of consciousness as he's
Mhm.
making his way, through this doomed journey. And,
Yeah.
he's probing at himself. I've already said he's not very reflective, but he becomes more reflective. It's the moment when he first flees with the money, puts his wife on a bus to Odessa, and then he's sitting in a restaurant and he orders a steak and sat chewing and thought about his life.
Right. Right.
And I
It's
love,
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah, because there are things that Cormac gets away with, and this is one thing I'm fascinated with in Cormac's work. There's things like that and thought about his life that he gets away with. They somehow end up being powerful, but I feel like I would never write that sentence because it would feel like
it's
not
not enough.
enough
It's not
or a cop
enough.
out or something,
What
right?
did he think?
Right, right. That would be my impulse. Or like, yeah, okay, my impulse would be he's gonna sit here and he's gonna think about his life. And I have to have a couple sentences there at
Right.
least that are what is he thinking? Um,
Yeah. McCarthy taught me you don't need that.
right, right. It's
You
fascinating.
can do it. You can
You
absolutely
can.
do it, of course,
Right.
but you
Yeah.
don't have to do it.
Right. Right. And I guess part of it
Also,
is about the context because, yeah, okay, he's going through all of this and he's thinking about his life. You're like, well, yeah, yeah. I mean, I kind of know, I have a sense of what he's thinking about.
some people are going to miss it, right? I was very
Mhm.
frustrated with Joyce Carol Oates.
Mhm.
She wrote a review for New York Review of Books, and
Mhm.
talking about the passage where Moss, goes back out to bring the dying narco water. She said, and then she says, like, then Moss goes back out to the scene of the crime for no reason. I'm like, for no reason? What are you
Yeah,
talking about? It's
that's
like
kind of
central. I mean, I was very frustrated
that is
with,
you can't say that's for no reason. I mean, that's yeah, yeah,
and then
that doesn't make
Michael,
sense. You can say
I,
it was stupid. You can say like that was
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
dumb
yeah.
thing but I mean, yeah, but it's
For no
not no
reason is
reason.
just untrue. And Michael
Right.
Chabon, I mean, just completely dismissed it. I think that
Hmm.
review was New York Times. I'm not sure about that,
Wow.
but Chabon wrote a review. And he just completely dismissed it as a genre novel.
Huh.
Like,
Right.
oh, this isn't McCarthy's best, and he's kind
Yeah.
of just doing a genre. And like, okay, first, if it is a genre novel, why does that make it lesser?
Yeah.
And second, um, I like, what genre novel kills off the main character
Right.
three-quarters of the way through off? So
Yeah.
I was frustrated with, And as writers, I've enjoyed um, Joyce Carol Oates and Michael Chabon, and
Hmm.
no shade to them as writers,
Right.
and in terms of their work, but shade to both of them for their takes on this book. That I will
Yeah.
go to war over. And
Yeah.
my attorneys are still in negotiations with Miss Oates.
Right.
Um, I want to look at a particular scene and
Yeah,
kind of,
please.
as we go, talk about some of the technical stuff and
Yes.
some of the techniques that Cormac is using. Now, this is Moss's first confrontation with Shagor and his only face to face. This is on page 110. So Moss is in this hotel room. He realizes something is wrong. And one of the things I want people listening to pay attention to is the way that McCarthy takes this Hitchcockian tension and just turns the dial up bit by bit by bit. The phone never rang. Something woke him. He sat up and looked at the clock on the table. 4:37. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and reached and got his boots and pulled them on and sat listening. He went over and stood with his ear to the door, the shotgun in one hand. He went in the bathroom and pulled back the plastic shower curtain where it hung on rings and turned on the tap and pulled the plunger to start the shower. When he pulled the curtain back around the tub and went out, then he pulled the curtain back around the tub and went out and closed the bathroom door behind him. He stood at the door listening again. He dragged out the nylon bag from where he'd pushed it under the bed and set it in the chair in the corner. He went over and switched on the light at the bedside table and stood there trying to think. That's one of those phrases you're just talking
Yeah.
about, and thought about his life, and stood there trying to think, right?
Right.
He realized that the phone might ring, and he took the receiver from the cradle and laid it on the table. He pulled back the covers and rumpled the pillows in the bed. He looked at the clock. 4:43. He looked at the phone lying there on the table. He picked it up and pulled the cord out of it and put it back in the cradle. Then he went over and stood at the door, his thumb on the hammer of the shotgun. He dropped to his stomach and put his ear to the space under the door. A cool wind, as if a door had opened somewhere. What have you done? What have you failed to do? So, rare moments of stream of consciousness,
Hmm.
direct access to this character's thoughts, as opposed to being filtered. He thought what he had done and what he'd failed to do
Yeah.
versus direct, what have you done? What have you failed to do? That's Moss directly. He
Right.
went to the far side of the bed and dropped down and pushed himself underneath it and lay there on his stomach with the shotgun pointed at the door, just space enough beneath the wooden slats, heart pumping against the dusty carpet. One of the things I love that Cormac does with emotion is sometimes he'll say, he felt frightened in a way he didn't understand, but usually he goes to the body and
Right.
shows you the physiological reaction of fear. So,
Hmm.
Moss under the bed, heart pumping against the dusty carpet.
Just thinking about this from a craft standpoint, I mean, how do you Cormac McCarthy seems like a master at doing that and yet also dodging cliche.
Mm-hmm.
How do you dodge cliche in something like that? Right? Because you can maybe get away with saying his heart pounded once in a book, but you can't say it every time, right? How do
Well,
you?
what does it for me, or how McCarthy avoids it for me, is
Mhm.
the specificity of all the details, the dust under the bed. Like he's
Mm,
thought about there's always dust under motel beds. He's thought about the wooden slats.
yeah.
And for me, that dodges it. I want to continue on here.
Sure.
Two columns of dark intersected the bar of light beneath the door and stood there. The next thing he heard was the key in the lock. Very softly. Then the door opened. He could see out into the hallway. There was no one there. He waited. He tried not to even blink, but he did. Then there was an expensive pair of ostrich skin boots standing in the doorway. Pressed jeans. The man stood there. Then he came in. Then he crossed slowly to the bathroom. At that moment, Moss realized he was not going to open the bathroom door. He was going to turn around. And when he did, it would be too late. Too late to make any more mistakes or to do anything at all, and that he was going to die. Do it, he said. Just do it. Don't turn around, he said. You turn around, I'll blow you to hell. The man didn't move. Moss was walking forward on his elbows, holding the shotgun. He could see no higher than the man's waist, and he didn't know what kind of gun he was carrying. Drop the gun, he said. Do it now. A shotgun clattered to the floor. Moss pulled himself up. Get your hands up. Step back in front of the door. He took 2 steps back and stood, his hands at shoulder level. Moss came around the end of the bed. The band was no more than 10 feet away. The whole room was pulsing slowly. There was an odd smell in the air, like some foreign cologne, a medicinal edge to it, everything humming. I love that so much because it really mimics or captures how you feel in the adrenal state, where the world is not making sense and you're, all your sensory organs are taking in all this data.
Yes.
Right? Moss held the shotgun at his waist with the hammer cocked. There was nothing that could happen that would have surprised him. I love that sentence. I love it so much. He felt as if he weighed nothing. He felt as if he were floating. I love the repetition of that. He felt. He felt this. He felt this. The man didn't even look at him. He seemed oddly untroubled, as if this were all part of his day. Back up. Some more. He did. Moss picked up the man's shotgun and threw it under the bed. He switched on the overhead light and shut the door. Look over here, he said. The man turned his head and gazed at Moss. Blue eyes, serene, dark hair. Something about him faintly exotic, beyond Moss's experience. What do you want? He didn't answer. Moss crossed the room and took hold of the footpost of the bed and swung the bed sideways with one hand. The document case stood there in the dust. He picked it up. The man didn't even seem to notice. His thoughts seemed elsewhere. He took the nylon bag from the chair and slung it over his shoulder, and he got the shotgun with its huge can-like silencer off the bed and put it under his arm and picked up the case again. Let's go, he said. The man lowered his hands and walked into the hallway. The small box that held the transponder receiver was standing on the floor just outside the door. Moss left it there. He had the feeling he'd already taken more chances than he had coming. He backed down the hallway with the shotgun trained on the man's belt, holding it in one hand like a pistol. He started to tell him to put his hands back up, but something told him it didn't really make any difference where the man's hands were. The bedroom door was still open, the shower still running. You show your face at the head of these stairs, I'll shoot you. The man didn't answer. He could have been a mute for all that Moss knew. Right there, Moss said. Don't you take another step. He stopped. Moss backed to the stairs and took one last look at him standing in the dull yellow light from the wall sconce, and then turned and doubled down the staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. He didn't know where he was going. He hadn't thought that far ahead.
Yeah.
I love that scene.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. I mean, the tension, the whole thing is just kind of humming. And but it also, and I want to hear more of your thoughts about it, but there's also this the the moral calculus or balance or whatever is happening here throughout this whole book, as I think exists in microcosm in this scene as well,
Absolutely.
because in my opinion, Moss should just shoot him,
Of course.
right? I mean, once you're in this game,
Right.
this is the game you picked, man. Like
Right.
you kind of have to kill this guy, in a way,
Yeah.
right?
He knows what
And he
it
could
is,
have,
though. He knows what it
right?
is. He
Yeah,
knows what it is
yeah,
to kill a man.
right.
And
He
and
does.
he
Yeah,
can't shoot an unarmed man.
right, right, right,
He
right.
can't do it.
Yeah, yeah. Oof.
And it
So what
costs him
else?
his life.
Yeah, yeah, it did. Him handling the situation the way that he did, partially for the same part of him that is the reason he went out into that back out to the desert with a jug of water, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So what, I mean, as a writer specifically, what are some things you take from this scene? If let's say
Right.
I'm sitting down, I want to write a sort of showdown, hold up, a scene comparable to this, right? What
Hmm.
is he doing so well here that somebody could take away as a insight, do you think?
Sensory impressions,
Hmm.
right? A focus on the details of the physical world,
Mm.
very few adverbs.
Yeah.
The sentences are quite short, up until the time that Shigor enters, and then they elongate after that.
Mm.
So
Mm.
those, and they're also, McCarthy loves to use the sentence fragment as if you're just picking up bits of data here and
Right.
there, right? As it, so the shorter sentences, and the specificity. He looked at the clock, the stuff he did with the phone. That one of the pleasures of the book is following Moss's trail of thoughts about how to operate in these situations. So we
Right.
understand why he takes the phone off the hook. We understand why he's like, no, that doesn't look right. I'll unplug it and then put it back in the cradle. We
Right.
understand why he, tousles or ruffles up the bed, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, and McCarthy's never going to tell you why he's doing that, right? You're figuring
That's
that
right.
out, you're piecing that together as a reader, and I think that's always, this is something I think about writing all the time too, is just trying to pick exactly the right amount of information to give the reader so that they have that satisfying experience of making the final connection themselves.
Hmm.
Right. So you're reading along, you're okay, I see him doing that. Oh, I know why he did that. And it gives you, probably on some neurochemical level, it's like, oh, that gives you a little dopamine hit, right?
Hmm.
Just making that tiny connection. Whereas I think in lesser hands, he would have explained a writer would have explained why all of this stuff is being done.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. Yeah,
Yeah.
you want to, well, you're rewarding the audience for being smart enough to understand.
Right.
And readers can feel like they're in on the bit. They're like,
Hmm.
"Oh, I get that. I
Yep.
understand what he's doing, what he's doing." And
Yes.
they feel rewarded by that.
Right, right. So it happens at the micro level, at the sentence level, right? But it also happens obviously overall in the book as a reading
Yes,
experience. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
100%.
yeah.
McCarthy has unusually good similes,
Hmm.
and he describes Sugar's eyes like pale, wet stones,
Hmm.
right? And also, one of the things he does with physical description, and my belief is that he takes this from Faulkner. When a character is first introduced, you get more of a kind of panning shot and you kind of get more physical detail about their appearance. And then in subsequent moments, you get the pale eyes You get that
Right.
one detail about the person that brings us back. Faulkner does this with Joe Christmas and Light in August. And the first time Christmas is introduced, we're shown Joe Christmas, and then Faulkner notes that, I mean, he basically has a 5 o'clock shadow.
Mm.
It's because he has a very thick beard, but he's clean shaven. But by the afternoon, Faulkner says, his jaw looked blue in the sunlight. So that which
Oh, that's
perfectly
nice. That's
captures
nicely
that's
done.
very nice, right? And
Yeah.
then the next time Joe Christmas is brought back in, Faulkner has him do something, the camera's on him, and instead of like his blue jaw, he stood there, his blue jaw, blah, 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 blah. Right. So the blue jaw becomes a metonym for Joe Christmas, becomes,
Right.
this is the part for the whole. And McCarthy does that um, a number of times here with Shagur. I don't remember there being a physical description of Moss.
I don't think there is one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're, yeah, I don't, there might be some detail here or there that I'm not thinking of, but we certainly don't get we certainly don't get that sort of, three or four sentences you could excerpt and be like, this is what Llewellyn Moss looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that
just
definitely doesn't
see
exist.
I just see Josh Brolin from the film,
It's
but
hard not
obviously
to. Yeah.
that's not, that's not the book. That's
Mhm.
they made the Coens made those choices. I
Mhm.
don't remember Sheriff Bell being physically described either.
Yeah, neither do I. Yeah, and that's always an interesting. I mean, I always find that to be an interesting choice by a writer, what level of physical description of the characters they choose.
Right.
It seems like you certainly can get away with either one, I guess. I mean,
You can.
yeah, yeah. I definitely find that in books where a lot of description of a character is put in, for me anyway, it doesn't usually, unless it's very distinct and it's very like it's done in a very unique way.
Hmm.
Um, it doesn't really add much to my mental picture of the character, to be honest. I
Right.
don't know what elements my sort of mind is using to put together my image of the character, but
Hmm.
it often doesn't have a whole lot to do with how the author describes them.
I agree.
Yeah,
But when
which
you have someone like Judge Holden, those
that
physical
case it does.
descriptions are massive.
Yes, yeah,
Massive.
because he's this monstrous, one of one kind of thing, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. So distinct.
And
Um,
sometimes it's more metaphorical.
right,
Across the fire sat the vast abhorrence of the judge. And other
right,
times
right.
it's he describes him in the Chihuahua City Baths as being like a manatee,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
that's
then,
pretty distinct.
pale and unwashed and
Mhm.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, sometimes I guess it definitely depends on, what you're trying to do as a writer. I wanted to go back to the point you made, which I'm fascinated by, of the short sentences versus long sentences. What is what's the obviously, if you're in Comp 101, someone's going to tell you should vary your sentence length, and that's to sort of just make the thing more readable by introducing some variation, right? So it doesn't seem monotone or whatever. But in here it's accomplishing something very particular and compelling. What is what's the deal with the varied sentence lengths in a scene like this?
Well, I think that shorter sentences slow us down, right? And
Mm,
in the context of the kind of tension that's going on, we feel like there's this,
mhm,
and then there's this, and then there's this, right? And so that turns up the dial. And then the longer sentences feel like things are happening more quickly,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
And you see that
yeah.
break.
Yeah, this reminds me, I'm not sure if you're familiar with uh this idea from filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky. He talks about
Hmm.
time pressure, and
Hmm.
part of how he was figuring out how to not only compose shots in terms of what's in the frame and what's not in the frame, but also in how long the shot goes on. That you're modulating the viewers, and this isn't how he would say it, but you're sort of modulating the viewer's experience of time to sort of match, say, the character's experience of time or create some other effect that you want, right? So I really like this idea that you're playing around with the actual material presentation to affect how the audience experiences time in that moment. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think I think you're totally right. I think there's a lot to be drawn from that. I think you could probably accomplish some of that, not instead of, but as well. It probably in line breaks too,
Yes. Yeah, you
right? When
can.
you Right, short paragraphs, longer
Hmm.
paragraphs. Yeah, yeah.
Something I wanted to talk about in terms of the advanced review copy versus the finished copy,
Ooh.
which generally they're precisely the same. So, what happens with the publisher is the publisher will send out what are called uncorrected proofs. So they've been copy edited, but they haven't been proofread. And you'll get a copy as an author as well. And I've had editors tell me, okay, if you make any changes or if you see anything that's wrong, you catch a misspelling or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
definitely point that out so we can change it. But don't start inserting things or deleting things too much,
Right.
because if you do, it will float the type. It will
Yep.
push the right text onto the next page and mess up the pagination.
Yep.
Well, McCarthy, I realized when I read the finished copy, I bought a hardcover when it came out just because I wanted one. And as I was reading, I was like, something's different. Like something's different. And then so I, got my review copy out and I saw that the page numbers start to be off around 200 or so.
Huh. In the
And
arc, you're saying.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. And so the
Yeah.
finished copy is a little bit longer than
Huh.
the review copy. So then I started hunting down the editions. So some of them are relatively minor, but one is quite interesting. And when Shigur is about to murder Carla Jean and he's talking to her, in the finished copy, he says, I had no say in the matter. Every moment in your life is a turning and everyone a choosing. Somewhere you made a choice. All followed to this. The accounting is scrupulous. The shape is drawn. No line can be erased. In the advanced review copy, that passage reads, everything in your life is present at every moment of your life to
Oh.
shape that moment, to fall at last heads or tails. Right?
Mm.
So, which is
Mm-hmm.
a real emphasis on chance and on fate. Whereas in the
Yeah.
finished copy, the emphasis obviously on choice. Everything in
Yeah.
your, every moment it's a turning, everyone a choosing. So
Yeah.
McCarthy thought better of it between the time of the advanced review copy and the finished book. And because he's Cormac McCarthy, they're like, okay, we'll float the type. We'll do
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. We'll fix it.
Also, in the review copy in his conversation with Uncle Ellis, it's pretty much the same. But in the finished copy, McCarthy inserts a line into Ed Tom Bell's mouth where he says, I'm not the man of an older time I thought I was. I'm a man
Mm.
of this time.
Mm.
Right. So the No Country for Old Men, Bell is not the old man. Like he thinks he's getting too
Interesting.
old for this. He thinks he's, you know, he's confronting someone that, he's not equipped to deal with. But what he realizes after he's quit is, no, I'm I'm a person of this time. I'm not a man of an older time.
Yeah.
That's an excuse.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, is there a way of looking at that too, where, because I think one of the things that the Ellis conversation does is sort of indicates to Bell or maybe the reader, because the Bell's sort of thing is that there's something new afoot in the
Right.
world that
Yep.
we haven't really dealt with before.
That's right.
And Ellis is like, the thing you're seeing is nothing new. And then tells the story of what is it, Bell's like great uncle or something that gets shot on his own porch.
Right.
Um, which is sort of indicating to us that like, yeah, maybe you've never dealt with this before, but this is how the world is, kind of. So I guess I'm wondering, is it like, and it can be, I think, both things at once. Sort of Ed Tom Bell. It's not that he's from the old world and so he's not ready for this new world. It's that also that the new world isn't maybe really all that different from the old world.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think, well, Cormac is playing with this idea. I always ask my students this. I taught this book earlier this semester, and
yeah,
I asked them then, can new things come into the world? In the first pages of the book, Sheriff Bell's talking about this boy he sent to be um, executed at Huntsville,
yeah.
and he says it got me to wondering if maybe he was some new kind, like there could
Right.
be some new kind of person. Um, and I think that is an idea that McCarthy believes that a
Mm,
new kind. I mean, it's all the chaos stuff, chaos theory stuff that comes out of the Santa Fe Institute.
mhm,
Um, like I think McCarthy believes like new kinds of
mm.
people can kind of abrupt into the universe, into the world,
Interesting. Is
and that
that,
Sugar is one
yeah.
of those.
And Shigura is one of those. Well, yeah, I mean, Shigura is well, I'm just trying to imagine is like, could there be a Shigura uh in the Blood Meridian setting, right? Or is that just too jarring? Doesn't make any sense there. We've talked about, you know, Holden and Shigura are kind of two different sorts of psychopaths, right? But
Very different.
Could Shigura exist in that world, or is there not even space in the world of Blood Meridian for a guy like Shigura?
I
Yeah, it's
I don't think Sugar could exist. I mean, part of what makes Sugar good at what he does is he's adapted to the modern technologies of the day,
hmm
1980,
hmm
and he's adapted the Marshall um, upgrades, like
hmm
the rear naked choke, right? In the
Yeah,
parking lot. He
yeah.
RNC's that guy.
Right?
And people have been doing chokeholds forever, but it's very deliberate that he knows this
Yes.
particular martial arts technique. It's very
Yeah.
deliberate that he has a suppressed shotgun. Now, like got a couple of quibbles. Um, yes, it is possible to quote suppress a shotgun. It, it's very rarely done
Mhm.
because I mean, you can bring the noise down. I mean, you're putting a massive choke on the end of the shotgun barrel for one, and
Right.
that's going to tighten the spread.
hmm
Um, you can bring the noise down, but you would still need ear pro. You couldn't get a shotgun quiet enough that you wouldn't need ear protection.
Ah, right, right,
And
right.
so McCarthy seems to believe Sugar is doing this, that he has this. I mean, he says it sounded like someone coughing in a barrel, which is a
Right.
beautiful simile, but that's not what a suppressed shotgun sounds like.
Right, right. I hadn't even considered that might not actually be technically possible in the way he's
Yeah.
saying. Yeah,
Yeah. You
yeah,
can suppress it. You can put a can on the end of it.
right.
Um,
It'll quiet it
and you
down
can,
some.
Yeah, if you're not a felon, you can SBS a shotgun. Your shotgun will go into NFA jail, and then you can buy an NFA item, which is a suppressor, and have a
Mm-hmm.
threaded barrel and put it on the end. But if you shoot that thing, you're still going to need ear protection.
Yeah. Yeah. So then, I mean, yeah, so I guess in a way it would be like, well, what would even be the point, right? I mean,
I don't think, well, it's quieter,
quieter, right, right.
quieter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's a believer in the shotgun, as am I,
Hmm.
um, for what he's doing. But he also, wait, he shoots Bell with a pistol. Moss with a
Moss,
pistol.
yeah. 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 Yeah, he doesn't shoot him with a shotgun, right?
Yeah, it's a
I
pistol
don't even
shot.
think he even has the shotgun, right? I think in the actual stage blocking of it, Moss has
Yes,
Sugar's shotgun and then he drops it in the street after he's
right.
shot. Yeah.
And there's a cartel shootout, right? Right after
Hmm.
that. Like all
Hmm.
these cartel guys, these narcos have kind of flooded in. And
Hmm.
Sugar walks up and before he shoots the guy, he makes the guy look at him.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
I have a different view of Sugar than a lot of people. I think Sugar is trying, if not to connect, then to understand, because human
Mm.
beings are such a mystery to him. He doesn't understand it. And he even asked Carla Jean at the end, why do you always say that? Why do you always
Right.
say you don't have to do this? And she says, there's just one of me.
Right.
And
Right.
he's like kind of called back and he goes, yes, right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, because he's almost at that point. He's like an alien. He's like an alien. That's
He's an alien.
gradually learning what human beings are like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
gradually. But
Yeah.
he's still, the best he can do is he changes from being a psychopath to being a sociopath.
Mhm.
And he recognizes that he can't be who he's been. He can't be this guy who allows himself to be handcuffed and taken to jail so he can, quote, extricate himself by an act of will. He has to
Mhm.
put himself in the service of something larger than himself. And he does that when he returns the money to the guy who put it up in the first place.
Right. 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 I've got uh one, and we can talk about any other aspects of this you want. I do have a question for you about the
Mm,
style of this book
hmm
relative to the style of prior McCarthy works. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if we sort of look at McCarthy's body of work, this book marks a departure
hmm
from what critics of McCarthy would call his stylistic excesses, I think.
hmm
I
hmm
That's not my opinion. They're not
Sure.
excesses in my opinion, but I think that's what people who dismiss McCarthy, that's what they'll say. It's like, well, you can make a parody of it, so it's,
Right.
whatever. What what is going on? What in your mind is obviously this is a choice, a creative choice.
hmm
um, what do you make of this change in style?
So part of what I believe is going on is that this book was originally written as a screenplay,
Mhm.
right? He tried to get it made in 1980. No one was interested in it in any way.
Mhm. Fools.
Yeah, yeah. Then 37 years later, it wins the Academy Award for Best Picture.
R-
I mean, it's
Right,
pretty great.
right. Yeah.
Um, so I think, I mean, he's obviously working off a script to build out this novel. And I think that style, the style of any kind of script, kind
Mm.
of bleeds into what you're trying to produce in the prose. And he also had begun to make a decision to write in a much sparser way. And you see that, of course, in The Road, which comes out the next year, that it's not
Mhm.
just like this script caused him to write in a different way with No Country for Old Men. It's that he was moving toward a much sparser style.
Mhm. Mhm. Do you think that's because and obviously we've got to, I don't want to over assume intentions, but I mean, do you
Right.
think well, okay, so here's one thing. And a
Hmm.
person could say, and I'm not saying this, I'm more curious about what's going on here. But a person could say, well, McCarthy kind of lost the mojo that one needs to write a book like Blood Meridian. So he's
Yeah,
writing very good stuff, but it's a little more workmanlike
I
than
think
his
he,
previous work.
I think he like felt. I don't know how McCarthy felt, but my
Sure.
speculating, I think
Hmm.
he felt like he'd done it. Like his
Mm,
most maximally Faulknerian and stylized book is Sutri,
yes.
right? Right.
Yeah.
That's the densest. And then Blood
Hmm.
Meridian comes along and it's way sparser than Sutri.
Hmm.
But it's high blown rhetoric and
Hmm.
heavily influenced by Shakespeare, heavily influenced by
Yeah.
the King James Bible. The prose is completely gorgeous.
Yeah.
And then
But it has
he
its moments of Baroque. It has moments where
Oh,
it's fairly
absolutely.
Baroque, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then with the Border trilogy, he moves toward this. It's less stylized than Blood Meridian, but it feels appropriate to the time it takes place, the late
Right.
1940s and early 1950s,
Right.
and
Right.
to the like cowboy, 20th century cowboy ethos.
Hmm.
Um, and then I feel like he wrote all of that out of his system,
Mm.
and he was interested in something else. A lot of people on the road came out talked about Beckett, um,
Hmm.
who McCarthy loved, and I don't know if McCarthy got it from Beckett, but it's certainly much more Beckettian than his other books.
Yeah, well, that's certainly true. Yeah. Yeah. So now this is something that I think about, Aaron, as a in the wonderful sort of analogy that you set up in a previous conversation we had between style of sort of transparent glass and stained glass, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, as a stained glass writer
Mm-hmm.
and seeing somebody like McCarthy move more towards the transparent glass sort of approach. And I see this in other writers, but I also see this interestingly in music too. If you're a band goes on for long enough, um, it does seem like towards the end of the career they become I don't want to say this in a dismissive way, but the music
Mm-hmm.
becomes quieter and the
Mm-hmm.
edges become rounder and it all starts to sound like not the same song, but it all more sort of smoothly sort of fits together, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think of this as a band like Radiohead, right? Early Radiohead
Mm-hmm.
is, kind of all over the place. And then by the end, a lot of the songs are they sound kind of the same. They're quieter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of that transition as being similar to this Cormac McCarthy's stylistic transition. And then I sort of wonder as a writer, like, well, should I just be accelerating myself towards that standpoint? Or, right? Should I just
Mm-hmm.
say, well, hey, that's where I'm headed anyway, eventually. Let's just go there. Um, I don't know. These are interesting questions for me, thinking about, overall career, how one develops.
I really think you have to find whatever voice, whatever style best suits and serves the story you're telling.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think the style of Blood Meridian serves that subject matter very well.
Yeah.
A novel set in the mid 19th century. And then the sparse poetic style of The Road serves that material very well. And
Mm.
the really stripped bare, at times screenplay like Prose of No Country serves this literary thriller quite well.
Right, right, right. So it's in a way, it's sort of about being faithful to the subject and put whatever words in that vessel of the word subject that you want, right? The theme, whatever. It's really
Right.
about serving that. as
I think
more
so.
than yeah,
Well,
yeah.
you have to
That
find the
makes sense to me.
tone, right? You have to
Right.
find the guitar tone for the
Mhm.
particular song you're playing. I mean, you
Yeah.
wouldn't want like a heavily distorted, dual rectifier Metallica tone on Queensryche's Silent Lucidity. You have to
Mm-hmm.
find the right you have to find the right tone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, that's the way I think about it. It's like, what is
Yeah.
the right voice? What is the right tone?
That makes sense. Yeah. I think that
And I
makes
think a
sense.
writer should like have as many of these tonal options, um, in his arsenal as possible, so
Hmm.
that you could write a book that's Nabokovian, and then you could write a book that's Faulknerian, and you could write a book that's Beckettian, and you could, whatever it
Hmm.
happens to be,
Right.
but that you
Right.
have all that equipment and all those tools.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I definitely think it's thinking of style as a one of the tools, style and tone in an interrelationship as being sort of one of the tools, right? It's
Yes,
yeah, yeah, I think
100%.
that's 100% true. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, final thing, Ed Tom Bell's dream at the
Yeah.
very end of the book.
Yes,
He
sir.
has two dreams after his father dies,
Yeah.
and one is about taking something in the town, or his father giving him something, and he thinks
Giving
he
him some
loses
money
it.
and he thinks he lost it. Yeah. Yeah.
But the second one, it was like we was both back in older times, and I was on horseback going through the mountains of a night, going through this pass in the mountains. It was cold and there was snow on the ground, and he rode past me and kept on going, never said nothing. He just rode on past, and he had this blanket wrapped around him, and he had his head down. And when he rode past, I seen he was carrying fire and a horn the way people used to do, and I could see the horn from the light inside of it, about the color of the moon. And in the dream, I knew that he was going on ahead and that he was fixing to make a fire somewhere out there and all that dark and all that cold. And I knew that whenever I got there, he would be there. And then I woke up.
Hmm.
I think one of the, besides the obvious McCarthy's Gnostic leanings and obsessions,
Carrying the fire. Yeah.
from Blood Meridian on, um, like so many things in this novel, that passage stands on a knife edge. So Bell has this hopeful spiritual dream. And before we get too excited about that, the next line is, and then I woke up.
Mm.
But also, the fact that you're awakened to the hard reality of a material world does not extinguish this spiritual dream you've had, and
Right.
does not keep you from relating that and passing that, the dream of fire, to others. So just like
Right.
Anton Chigurh may well have walked away from the car crash, holed up somewhere and died. He also may have walked away from the car crash, treated himself like he did his gunshot wound, and lived. Right? So,
Hmm.
so many things in this novel are, stand on that knife edge.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and that's that. Yeah, I quite like that. And you're right. I've thought about that passage a lot. I never really thought about the and then I woke up part for whatever
Really?
reason. Yeah. And now that you're
Hmm.
mentioning this, it does seem like that is ultimately what sort of seals it off, or not seals it off. That's what actually integrates it into the rest of the whole book. Now that I'm
Right.
thinking about it. Yeah, yeah. It's a fascinating passage.
Yeah. This
Yeah.
thing, I had this dream, and this dream is hopeful, and
Hmm.
there's promise in it.
Hmm.
And then I woke up.
And I woke up. Right. And it bounces off or echoes with a lot of the other things that I think Ed Tom Bell has sort of said throughout the book, the sort of, well, I thought one day God would come into my life. And,
Right.
I hear him relate that dream and I'm like, man, that might have been it right there. Like
Yes.
you don't know how it's going to come to you. It doesn't, it's not maybe going to be a bearded guy in the sky stepping down off his throne and telling you, "I am God, listen to my words." Right? It might be
Yeah.
a much
And
subtler set of images that you can actually deal with.
yeah, and Bell says that he doesn't blame God because if he were God, he
Mm.
would have the same opinion of him that God has.
Right, right. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's funny. That's the I'm so glad they included that in the film because I think even a slightly less masterful filmmakers would have just decided that that didn't need to be on screen.
Yes.
And there you could have finished it a few minutes earlier. Um, but I'm so glad that they did.
I am too. I mean, it's the
Yeah.
kind of filmmakers the Coen brothers are.
Hmm.
You have to make decisions with Shagor. You can't show him changing
Hmm.
into this. I mean, I want to say better person, though better is relative. Better in terms of where he started. But you can't show that in a movie. The audience would get confused. So they
Yes.
just have him be this flat surface, which works better for the film.
Right.
As opposed to showing, I mean, they show him walking off with the money after the car crash, and he's already taken the money back to its owner in the novel.
Right.
I think they make the right choices because you have to make those choices.
Yeah. I mean, that's the art of it. I mean, not that I've ever done it, but that's the art of adapting a book into a film. They're different mediums,
Right.
different things work. So yeah, it definitely makes sense.
One final thing, Josh Brolin, I saw an interview with him, and he said that when they were shooting No Country for Old Men, that he has a kind of he's called him a scumbag friend who works as a bouncer and knows how to get different people's phone numbers, and so he got
Mm,
McCarthy's number and he called him and got an answer machine, said, hey, we're down here and wherever it was, and we'd love it if you drove down for the day and hung out with us.
mm.
And no answer. And, leaves several more messages, and then he gets fired up one day, and he calls, gets the answer machine, and he's like, "Listen, man, we're making this movie based on your book. I don't understand what." And then the phone picks up, and
Ah,
it's Cormac McCarthy, right? And he was like, "Oh, hello.
yeah.
I got your message. I'm sorry, I was out of town traveling, and yeah, I'll come down." And so Brolin was like, he was all excited. It was like, "Oh, Cormac McCarthy's coming to set." And then McCarthy showed up at set and spent all day talking to the armorers about guns.
Yeah. Right.
Didn't want to hang out with the cast, didn't want to hang out with the
Yeah.
crew, didn't want to hang out with the director, wanted to hang out with the armorer.
Right. That sounds right. Yeah,
Kind of amazing.
that sounds totally right.
All right.
Well,
So,
Aaron,
yes, we
yeah,
have
the
the next part of this episode. We will dive into the madness
yes, sir.
behind No Country for Old Men.
Yeah, we're gonna couple things we'll do just as a tease. One thing is we're gonna get as close as we possibly can to understanding what Llewellyn Moss may have gone through in Vietnam based on what very little information we have about his Vietnam experience. We're gonna
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about something we sort of brushed against in this conversation is about No Country for Old Men as a genre work. Is it
Mm-hmm.
genre? What genre? What are the parameters of whatever genre this thing is actually in?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one other thing, there's a few other things I want to talk about, but another thing I want to talk about is where the title for this book comes from
Right.
and what relevance that might have. And so, join us for that. I think we're gonna have a good time.
Sounds great, man.
All right, see you guys.